Alright everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to be covering Lab 14 with a little bit of 13, just a tiny bit. Today we're going to be going over how to identify the human lineage, okay? So what we're going to be focusing on is the three types of bipedalism and how you can differentiate them. We're going to describe the major adaptations for bipedalism, and we're going to describe different theories on what led to the rise of bipedalism and how it evolved over time. And so we'll go over all this in today's lecture. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about fossils in general. So the first primate fossil appears about 56 million years ago, but we're not sure what happened between that and the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, okay? Because there's gaps in the fossil record. So a fossil is what remains of an organism that's preserved in rock, okay? So this consists of impressions and molds and casts. So how a fossil forms is, as we can see here, an individual dies, right? And because of that postmortem interval and taphonomy, like we talked about when we're going over the human skeleton in Lab 7, the soft tissue decays and what remains are the bones. What happens is once the bones are out, instead of decomposing, a depositional event occurs, such as like a flood, right? And so the individual gets encased in mud, the skeleton gets encased in mud, and it forms an anaerobic environment, so that means that there is no air present. And because of this lack of air, instead of regular decomposition occurring in the bones melting away, what happens is that the inorganic material is replaced, or the organic material is replaced with minerals, and so that essentially the entire bone becomes rock. So over time, continuously deposition, this gets buried, and so it occurs over hundreds of thousands of years, or thousands of years. And so when it erodes, we see the fossil and we dig it out and then we can analyze it, okay? And so what we can see is different adaptations in the bone that led to bipedalism and what makes us human, right? Over millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And because this only occurs under specific conditions, not everything becomes a fossil. So we have gaps in the material record, right? So, new kind of mammal, our first primate, so this is what the first primate looked like, and we have fossils of it, came onto the scene about, like I said, 56 million years ago. And so, in review, primate order, in this first primate fossil here, had a larger brain size compared to body, generalized molars, ability to climb and leap, and nails instead of claws, forward-facing eyes, and a post-orbital bar with or enclosed bony orbits, okay? So, how do I identify the first humans, okay? What's the hallmarks of humans in human evolution? So, what we use is brain size, tool use, and bipedalism. So there are issues with brain size and tool use, which we'll get into in a second. So we primarily rely on bipedalism to differentiate humans from other species. So, like we said, there was an increase in brain size. So this is a hallmark of human evolution. So you can see in this list that we have one of the highest brain sizes. We're pretty close. Neanderthals and us are relatively close. They also have large brains, okay, that are possibly larger than us, but we're relatively close in terms of ancestry. Earlier humans, or earlier hominins, did not have as large brains as we did. So we calculate, even though brain tissue decomposes, we can calculate brain size by calculating the cavity, how large the brain cavity is. So we can, and this is called cranial capacity. So this is the amount of space available. And we do that with ball bearings, where we fill it in and we measure how many ball bearings. And we can do this now with 3D imaging, right? Which is so cool. And 3D scanning. So large brains are not unique to humans. Other animals such as whales also have large brains, but they're also much larger than us in terms of body size. And some animals, like mice, do have large brains and small bodies, but what makes us different is the organization and function of our brains and our large relative body to brain size is what is unique to us. So another aspect is tool use, but it's problematic because, like we saw earlier, is that chimpanzees and other large apes can use tools too. And even smaller, like monkeys, can use tools. But what differentiates us is we have more complex tools. But this is also problematic, differentiating what's complex and simple, because we use both simple and complex tools. And we'll get into different tool uses of our hominin ancestors later. So the most important defining feature to identify hominins is bipedalism, specifically obligate bipedalism. So bipedalism isn't limited to just our species, but obligate bipedalism is. So types of bipedalism. First, you have occasional bipeds. So these are like a bear can walk on its hind legs, right? Or chimps can carry something, but they're normally knuckle walking. So this is, they rely primarily on a different form of locomotion, but they can do it sometimes. There's few, if any, anatomical adaptations to bipedalism in these species. Habitual bipeds practice bipedalism regularly, but also rely on a different form of locomotion like brachiation or knuckle walking. So this is a mixed locomotor adaptation. So this is what our earliest ancestors had, such as Ardipithecus, Ramidus, and even we think Australopithecus. Obligate bipedalism is us, right? So we practice bipedalism all the time. We can brachiate, but our primary locomotion is walking upright and moving forward, okay? So we have specialized adaptations for this. Okay. But before we get into those adaptations, we'll go into when did the transition to bipedalism occur. And we can see this in our earliest ancestor. We can mostly see this in Australopithecus afarensis, so Lucy, right? So we have Lucy over here. Oh. Right? And we have the Laetoli footprints, which we'll get into in a second. So evolution of bipedalism was likely gradual and occurred separately over time. So different species developed it and separately, okay? So this is what we call mosaic evolution. Bipedalism for sure developed with Australopithecines in 3.5 to 4 million years ago. But it looks like it could have been earlier, between 7 to 4.4 million years ago, because the pre-Australopithecines have mixed adaptations, okay? So they look like they were habitual bipeds. So the Laetoli footprints are cast impressions that we can see. They're fossilized, right? So an ancient ancestor of ours was walking along in mud, and their footprints are preserved. So we can see the first conclusive evidence of bipedalism with these footprints. We can see specifically a heel toe striking off. So when you walk, right, you can move from your heel toe and use your toe to propel yourself forward. And so we can see this because our the Laetoli footprints big toe, their hallux is in line with the rest of their foot and not divergent like a hand, right? So most other primates have divergent hallux on their feet for grasping. We don't have that. We have inline big toe for propelling ourselves forward. So briefly touched on that. Now we'll get into bipedalism adaptations that we can see in our skeletal structure. The biggest one is in the cranium, and this is the foramen magnum. So our foramen magnum is positioned at the base of our skull, as we discussed when we were going over the skeletal record. Okay, so this is so that we have normal relaxed position of the head, viewing forward, and we can rotate our head and look around us while we're walking upright. Okay, and because we're upright, it has to be positioned right at the bottom. A chimp, as you can see here, their foramen magnum is a little bit further up, and that's because they're knuckle walking, right? So their have to look forward while knuckle walking and being quadrupeds, okay? And you can see the extreme differences between us right at the base. Chimpanzee kind of walks a little bit upright, right? It's a little bit further back, but a dog is almost at the back of the skull, right? And that's because they only walk on all fours. Okay. So what we also have is a really robust mastoid process, like we talked about earlier, right? So this is a site of extreme muscle attachment. So we need a lot of neck muscles to be able to support our head upright. And mastoid processes are a lot less pronounced in other primates because they don't need as robust muscles. So in postcranium, we have a couple different adaptations. First, when we look at the vertebral column, we have that S shape that we talked about, right? So it curves like an S. So we see here that the weight is positioned more onto the larger lumbar vertebrae. And so this is more weight bearing and helps shift the upper body weight to the pelvis, okay? So that our lower limbs take most of the strain. Well, in primates, especially chimpanzees, they have a C curve because they're not, they don't need that weight bearing because all their weight is onto their knuckles, right? And their legs. So it's more evenly distributed. They don't need that S-shaped curve. Our pelvises, like we said, are narrow and basin shaped, and this is to support by walking forward and to provide more muscle attachment because we need robust gluteal muscles, so butt muscles, than like a gorilla, right? And this also helps with weight bearing. And we have a video down here that shows the differences between different walking, bipedal walking of chimpanzees, our early ancestors, and also us. And so what we see here too, you notice how narrow our bowl-shaped our pelvis is versus a gorilla pelvis here. So that means that we're more adapted to walking upright and they're more adapted to knuckle walking. Okay. So next, our lower limbs are also more elongated. In humans, our thigh, our femur, comprises primarily 20% of our body, which is only 11% in chimps. And going along with that, our femur is also angled inward to keep our legs more directly under the body. Okay, so this is what causes chimpanzees when they walk, or other great apes, to walk upright. Try to get back a little bit. They have a waddle, right? Because our legs are directly under us, we can propel ourselves forward and move forward easier. You're not waddle. So our foot is also very important, like we discussed a little bit earlier, right? So we have short toes because we don't need a grasp, and this provides more support and balance, and also that propulsion we talked about. We have that non-divergent hallux, right, to keep it light, to allow for that propulsion. And we also have a longitudinal arch. Well, most of us do. I'm flat-footed, but most people have a longitudinal arch that allows for shock absorption and allows for more spring forward. Even I have more of an arch like a chimpanzee, right? We can see that the types of muscle attachment needed here in this, the differences between us and primates, apes. And we can see how we have a more robust heel and that arch there. You can see that arch there and see the adducted, so inline hallux versus opposable hallux. Big deal. Okay, so why did bipedalism evolve? Okay, so there's several different theories and none of them are, not one single one is the most accurate and most accepted. There's all sorts of different reasons why they're proposed, and we'll get into a couple of them. So the Savannah hypothesis, provisioning hypothesis, carrying model, thermoregulatory, endurance running, and also weighting. And so what's cool is I included a resource for you. So in this resource, this bipedalism model evaluator, you can see how effective each of these models are. in determining why bipedalism evolved. So it's really cool. So they use a statistical model and they weight each trait, such as like survival value, sexual selection, improved foot acquisition, things of that nature. And then they can tell you the results of it. So we see here that the most percentage is actually river ape hypothesis. We'll get into that in a second. So it's really cool because you can click on it and it'll tell you who developed the model, what the model describes, why it's good, what are the problems with it, pros and cons. So you can do that for all the models we're about to talk about. So this is a really cool resource. Okay, so first you have the savanna hypothesis. So this was proposed in the early 1930s. So this is one of our first hypotheses of bipedalism done by a gentleman, Raymond Dart, who's a pioneer in this field. So this proposed that we were selectively favored, bipedalism was selectively favored in open grassland environments around 8 to 5 million years ago due to loss of forest areas and shifting environments. The problem is that we have found earlier fossils since then that, like Ardipithecus ramidus, that are thought to have lived in dense forested environments, but also were habitual bipeds. The next hypothesis is provisioning. So this says that bipedalism evolved in monogamous male human fathers to provision food resources to female partners. So we were able to carry, men were able to carry more food to women while they were pregnant. Okay, so we needed to free up our hands to carry more food. So there's a chimp with food, right? He's walking on 2 legs, not knuckle walking, right? And here's a video of that too, because everyone likes videos of chimps. Okay, so the similar model is a carrying model that instead of carrying food for provisioning, we were carrying tools and weapons to be able to hunt and move around easier, right? So we needed to free up our hands to use these tools. And also another version is that we adapted to throwing weapons. And here we have atlatl or atlat, if you're using the Nahuatl term. And you can see how you can throw a spear, and your body, you need you need to be upright to be able to throw it properly, right? Because it has a particular motion that's needed for it. And you can watch a video of how to throw an atlat hit down here. So another hypothesis, less behavioral, more environmental, is that thermoregulatory. So when we were in open equatorial habitat, so the savanna again, we were subject to more solar radiation while on all fours. So we developed walking upright so the sun wouldn't beat down on us as much, and we were more open to the wind to cool us off more. So this is very interesting hypothesis, and I very cool, but it seems a little simplistic, right? And it discounts a lot of the behavioral stuff we were talking about in the other models. Next one that kind of goes along with that carrying model and also the thermoregulatory is that we needed we developed bipedalism for endurance running or persistence hunting. Okay, so endurance running possibly played an important role for early hominins in obtaining food. We were able to out-jog our prey, right, or to be able to run towards scavenged carrion easier. Okay, and we have a really interesting video about persistence hunting, so you can watch this and see how the Akun or the San people, some of the last hunter-gatherers, are able to hunt using this method. And it's really interesting. I highly suggest that video. So the last one is called the weighting model. So this is essentially that we developed to walk upright because we were eating a lot of marine resources, and so this is that river ape hypothesis, right, that we talked about that seems to be the most likely. And so essentially what this says is that apes will always walk upright when they're in the water, so that we started walking upright because we were in the water, okay, reducing it down. And so this is also a revised version of what's known as the aquatic ape theory. So this is no longer seen as valid. It's more kind of like a joke hypothesis at this point. But this was that we developed bipedalism because we were constantly in the water in marine environments. So we were essentially similar to like a marine animal, like a seal. And that's why we're more hairless and have more subcutaneous fat than other apes. So it's a very interesting model, but not scientifically valid anymore. So, yeah. So, but what is scientifically valid is that weighting model that we wanted to make use of more riverine resources and marine resources. Okay. So for this week, we have Lab 14 and do exercises 1 through 6, skip exercise 7, and on part B for exercise 1, look at a different feature than the foramen magnum. Okay, so this will talk about like how to look at bipedalism in different animals, and so use one of the other different traits we talked about than foramen magnum. All right. I hope everyone is doing well and hope you're staying safe. I will see you again next week.